Dear saxophone friends, sirs and madams, thank you to be here to share. Good morning with us. My name is A.Fernandez, saxophonist, professor at Conservatorio Superior de Vigo, and international PhD in education by Universidad Autónoma de Madrid, United States at CNSM in Paris, with Monsieur Fernández as advisor. First of all, I would like to thank the organization for the invitation and being able to take part in this amazing event. As a lecturer, in the past 2 EURSAX congresses and in the last EURSAX Congress in Canarias, for me it has become a sort of tradition being in this forum talking about my latest researches. For my PhD thesis, I tried to explain how the image of the saxophone was transformed by the classical music, from an almost forgotten instrument hiding in the stands of the circus of military band to the solist status invited in the top symphonic orchestras in the world in just only 50 years. Thanks to the organological evolution of the instrument, the emergence of an emblematic repertoire in which the saxophone was able to show its lyrical potential, and the awakening of two great saxophone virtuosi, and Marcel. Nonetheless, as instrument without performance or mastery cannot become consolidated, which make it essential to create a common way of teaching for mastering the technical development of the players, systematizing knowledge and developing skills through the codification of procedures and the creation of teaching materials for the new students. This is actually the topic for today, to talk about the different saxophone schools through its 180 years of history. Two sentences by Master Jean-Marie Londex marked my research. One of them was the periodic division for the history of the saxophone through its repertory, from Berlioz to Debussy, from Debussy to Denisov, and the last one from Denisov to our current days. On the other side, in the middle 80s, Londex said that at that moment there was no saxophone virtuoso in the world that was not influenced by Master Mühl and his saxophone teaching, directly or through his disciples. From the Unity, the first statement was complete in my thesis, taking into account not only the repertoire, but the organologic evolution of the saxophone and the development of the way of playing by the saxophonists, verifying that they went hand in hand with each other and that in some aspects were nothing but consequences of the others, adding circumstances such as the presence and acceptance of the saxophone in other styles, such as jazz. Although this topic of the saxophone school was not initially contemplated in my thesis, to my purpose, it was finally essential to understand how the saxophonist played through the age and what the information was. I needed to be able to understand how the performance was by the time the pieces were composed, and which techniques have been used by the main players through the history. To summarize this aspect, pieces as Ibarra Concertino, Larson Concerto, the Gluck Sonata, the Saint-Claude Cadence Final, or even Denisov Sonata were impossible to play without new organologic standards for the instrument and without proper saxophonist techniques. On the other side, it is very difficult to figure out Charlie Parker playing ornithology with an adult sax instrument. About the second statement, in spite of having been studied my previous work in a summarized way, since it was not one of the main objectives, it must be developed in a deeper way. And today, 4 years of research later, I have the pleasure to share with all of you in this lecture and from the next October, I hope, in a new book which will be named Souffler et Vibrate, a saxophone history through its teaching. Why soufflé, and pépéré, because these words are the more repetitive words that former professor at Conservatoire de Paris, Monsieur Daniel Lafayette, gave as piece of advice for his students, as Monsieur Cloteland told me during my research. In my opinion, these two words describes perfectly a way of saxophone playing, the French tradition, the school that Marcel and others founded, and as I was able to verify in my previous work, the most influential saxophone playing way for the classical parodies in the world, as let's say in the 80s. The main objective of the program research focuses on the classical saxophone teaching is to establish a timeline that explains how the teaching learning the process of the saxophone has evolved through its pedagogy. The book is organized in eight chapters plus 2 appendixes. The chapters take a tour of the history of the saxophone from 1946 to 2024, through all the territories where the classical saxophone is taught, visiting all the classical teachers who have left significance because of their students or because of their teaching materials. Through this page, it is possible to find 3 periods of time associated to 3 saxophone players typologies. The first one is an original clarinet players, a period marked by the use of the saxophone in civil or military bands that is common everywhere in the world. In general, the first saxophone players, especially during the 19th century, were originally clarinet players because of the instrument affinity and relatively similar embouchure or breathing technique. Sax, Soyer, Lefebvre, Moremas, Mayer, maybe even Sigurd Rascher, by his previous teaching, could be the last one of this group. They were very worried about getting a prodigious technique and very wide register. During this period, we can distinguish 2 sub-periods, depending on the pedagogic material that they use. An initial one, in which the methods are written by composers, music theorists, and musicologists, and the second one, where these materials are done by the performers, from their experience. In many cases, the pedagogic materials are inspired by the clarinet ones if they are not exactly the same, as to say, for example. We could prove this event in the comparison of the double embouchure and also in many drawings in which the saxophone is shown to be played with the reed in the upper side, as the clarinet is still played in a popular way in some places right now. In this last sub-period, we can include the materials elaborated by the musician from the Garde Républicaine to train future members, starting from their own experience and with a big amount of references from the cult and symphonic music, with a wide use of transcriptions. In the same way, we can understand the saxophone development in the USA, starting from its arrival associated to the military bands until its reign in light music and jazz, and how the clarinet players had to adopt the new instrument, as was the case of Sidney Bechet. On the other hand, in the American classical saxophone field, we can appreciate the particular idiosyncrasy of a practicing system that, more than for being specialized, promotes instrumentists able to play different woodwinds instruments in a sufficient way. The next period is the previous string players. Nowadays, it would be unthinkable to understand the modern saxophone without Marcel Meux's contributions and the ones from his partners in the Garde Républicaine or in the Quatuor, and the ones from his students, Meux, who was a violin player, or Marcel José, cello player, and saxophone teacher at Conservatoire de Versailles could alternate the string instrument with the saxophone in a really proficient way. Also, Daniel Defayet, maybe Muse's first outstanding student, was a professional violin player for a time. This situation allowed them to alternate the symphonic or opera orchestra stands, assuming the style, costumes, and interpretative parameters of instruments with a large tradition, with the military music or cabaret stands, which represent the freedom of a mesquite instrument. This huge background allowed them to try the string guard with the instrument. The most important contribution is the saxophone tone quality. For that, they compared the use of the air column with the violin bow. They improved the sound with the use of the vibrato as well. At the same time, the emergence of jazz or band music that they had to play to earn for a living and its performer marked perhaps a subconscious influence in the French saxophonists. Ivan Brook, one of the Muse disciples, compared Marcel Muse's vibrato with Johnny Hodge, and both were surprisingly similar. This kind of sensibility for the string player was not only present in Muse. We can find a similar conception in the USA with Larry Thiel, one of the classical saxophone pioneers, but not in the same way due to his different approach to the saxophone. The massive development of the saxophone quartet formation, as if it were a string quartet, comes also from this period and these virtuous players. They knew how to put an amazing technique, proficiency, and a bright and light articulation together as well. The assignment of the saxophone class of the Paris Conservatory, one of the most prestigious musical teaching institutions in the world, to the best saxophone player from this period, Marcel Muse, become the French school in pioneer and reference for the saxophone in the world. They came to study virtuous players from North America to Far West, who, as prophets, spread the instrument new possibilities all over the world, together with an incipient repertoire generated around Muse saxophone class. École Française du Saxophone is the title of a work of an education nature segment by Robert Duet in 1963, in which, in 3 volumes, the author intended to summarize the technical and interpretative characteristics of the school created by Marcel Muse. As Lombeck said, the name responds to the nomenclature proposed by the saxophonist and musicologist Georges Goudet, who points out that, based on the traditional interpretation of the wind instrument in France, inherited from Potetier, in terms of predominance given to the text, the style, harmony and elegance, a precise natural articulation, a simple and dedicated way of playing, to which Maestro Muse adds the expressive force of vibrato, adding, in my opinion, the imitation of the movement of the bow of the strings through the use of the blow on the saxophone. The last period was the saxophone specialized. From the second half of the 20th century, a new generation showed up, the saxophone specialized. Most of them students of CNP, CNSM, or Muse pupils in France or around the rest of the world. An interconnected net, which takes the professors' school to different places, is created. In France, through new regional conservatories and schools that rely on specialized as saxophone teachers. This model was very later imitated in other countries such as Spain, Portugal, or even Italy. In the USA, through its presence at the universities, with teachers who come back from their formation in France and who will teach specialized as well, that will take positions in other institutions. conscious of the technical and acoustic possibilities of the instrument, virtuous players like Friedrich Henke, Eugene Rousseau, Londaix, or Ivan Roth, and many others, put all these new possibilities together in a new techniques and repertoire conception, making it develop and projecting it toward the future. In the 70s, Daniel Defayette asked Pierre Boulez the reason why he didn't compose for saxophone, and he answered that only in France the saxophone was played comme il faut, and he had no interest in composing for only local playing. In the last 90s, Boulez worked hand by hand with a very young Vincent David to play his music with a saxophone around the world. The current saxophonists assume as part of their DNA extended techniques that allows to play contemporary music to different styles or instruments, original music through the transcriptions. From this time, the alto saxophone is not the one and only saxophone to play as a soloist. And instruments such as the soprano have its prime in solo and chamber music in recent years, as tendency has converted the baritone in the fashionable saxophone in the last 10. With this new awareness, they are able to get the interest of the most important composers from the end of the 20th century, encouraging them to treat the saxophone in the same way as the rest of the instruments with symphonic traditions. I would like to share some thoughts to finish. What means playing classical saxophone in 2024? Attending to Michel in Milan in the Cambridge Companion to the Saxophone, every current saxophone player in the world must be able to play every piece of music. That sentence means that to be a saxophonist, it is needed to know not only the ordinary technique, but the standard techniques too. Works such Saxology by Daniel Kienzio, Hello Mr. Sax by Londaix, even the recent techniques of saxophone teaching by Marcus Weiss and Simone Movio are now well known around the world of the saxophone. Techniques as double tonguing, circular breathing, disvigliando, glissandi, fluting, etc., when they are demanded, are added to the saxophone even to play baroque music, classic or romantic music by saxophonists all around the world, and improvisation become as part of the saxophone territories. As Jean-Denis Michel said, the classical jazz border is not as marked as it used to be. Classical musicians tend to free themselves, and jazzmen have become scholars. The relevance of saxophonists such as Claude Delang, Arno Volcan, Marie Tradier, Xavier, Nobuya Sugawa, Debra Meyer, or Mario Mazzi, all of them educated in the French tradition, a generation that is in the last active years as a player has been immense over the world. There is not a saxophonist over 20 years old who has not known one of their recordings, attending one of their concerts, or listening to one of their master classes. This specializes, together with the globalization fact, and supported by the communications and information access development, dilate the borders that could exist between different schools and make possible a globalization phenomenon in technique, repertoire, and the general conception about the way to play saxophone. Might be only known, as the language said, by the donation characteristics of the different modern language of the performers. On the other hand, political borders have fallen for interpreter teachers. Nowadays, it's common to find a Spanish student in France in a class plenty of Japanese mates, an Ukrainian saxophonist teaching in Germany being a former student of a Canadian professor, a crew of brilliant Portuguese students in the conservatories of the Netherlands, former students of teachers educated by a Dutch teacher, a preeminent crossover teacher in the USA that was attending lessons for Rachelians, Syntaholics, or heirs of the Valle. That's allowed all of us to share a common language and a lot of possibilities of collaboration and understanding. With this globality, in a competition attending only for the audience, it's difficult to know if you are listening to an American, a French, or a Chinese saxophonist. So it's easy to think that we are living in a sort of global school of the saxophone. Just to finish, I would like to share some words by Jean-Denis Michel. It is essential today that schools mark their national specificities with a hot iron. The French school was the historical, geographical basis God for us. That time is over. The Spaniards took what they was to take, and that's great too. You have to know other schools to live in peace, of course, but you also have to cultivate differences with love. To maintain the plurality of styles, tastes, and repertoires. Know others to respect them. Know yourself to be creative. Artistic inspiration cannot come from unification. To create is to shout out who you are and where you come from. And last, I will share with you another example of music. Thank you. Thank you very much.
only in Spanish?
At the moment, it will be available only in Spanish, but maybe we have to talk about an English version. Maybe for the next year, for the fall of 25.
I thought it was very interesting. First of all, thank you very much for the presentation. Very interesting, especially how you put into words something I've been thinking about recently as well, about how the French school was so important for the saxophone role at the beginning. But now we really entered into what I would also definitely call it a global kind of situation where I'm surprised when I go back to the United States to hear how European or French many people are sounding. And it's, I think, certainly true for different styles, different areas within Europe, like in Italy and Spain, for example. But I noticed in the presentation you focus mostly on the French tradition, but I would also say that there are kind of other traditions, maybe smaller, minor traditions in Europe, like for example in Germany and in Spain. And I thought maybe it would be interesting for us to hear a little bit more about how you would describe the Spanish saxophone world. I was hoping to hear a little bit about that also in the presentation.
I don't put in the presentation. It's treated in the book. Obviously, there are a chapter about Russian schools and the Brazilians and their influence in the rest of Europe. It's true that it's a very close community. Not right now, because, for example, Andreas Van Solen is a very open-minded person and works with other traditions. Maintains his essence, but open to others. And in Spain, we have a French heritage, very clear. Not the new heritage, but the French school came to Spain in the 70s. So it was made by students who worked with Fayet or with non-aids. And majority the saxophone community in Spain are here, so vocalists, people, more or less. But at the end, nowadays there are a lot of crossovers, not only the vocalists, but it's the main substance of the saxophone conception and repertoire. We have also a lot of influence from Charles Pichon through Claude Delangle, but through others Spanish saxophones who started with Pichon, as Francisco Martinez, who is here, Antonio Felipe Belijar. They went to Lyon to work with him in the same way that the current generation, the people from my age or younger even, was to Lyon to study with Jean-Louis Guichard, and then to Paris with Claude Delangle. Nowadays there are an interesting community studying in Amsterdam or in Netherlands. There are a lot of Spanish students in Netherlands, and most of them are coming to Spain. And now we have, I think, a very interesting way of saxophone playing. You can see in the competitions there are a lot of Spanish saxophonists playing in the semi-finals or in the finals. It's worked in the book, but I thought that not was very interesting to share in a European context. I prefer to focus in the general distribution of the schools. Well, it's time to have a breakfast.